I found out about my non-critical status because my manager, Lewis, didn't check if I had headphones on before he started talking. He stood 2 feet behind my chair discussing restructuring with our HR rep like they were picking paint colors. I heard my own job title before I heard the words that followed it. Ops analytics isn't mission critical. If we have to trim overhead, we start there. The HR rep mumbled something about documentation, optics, and value perception, but Lewis waved her off. He was the kind of manager who relied on confidence instead of competence. He dressed like a VP, talked like he already had the corner office, and treated people like stairs he was supposed to climb. When they finally noticed me sitting there, Lewis blinked like I'd materialized out of nowhere. "Oh, Grant, didn't see you." He said it with the smile of a man who didn't regret a word. I slid my headphones down. I heard enough. He didn't apologize. He didn't clarify. He just nodded like we'd had a normal conversation and walked back to his office, where he'd spend the next hour rewriting my job into something he could outsource or automate. That night, I stayed in the office later than usual. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I needed to know the truth. Was I actually non-critical? Was the system really sturdy enough to survive without the early warning scripts, the flagged anomalies, the quiet fixes I'd pushed through before anyone noticed? I opened the maintenance logs, then the error backlog, then the vendor billing feeds. It took 20 minutes to confirm what I already suspected. No one else was watching the patterns. The models I'd built weren't magic. They were just detailed, boring, relentless, like me. They caught oversights before they became problems. They linked vendor discrepancies with procurement drift. They prevented the small cuts that eventually bleed a department dry. Lewis didn't understand any of it, but the numbers did. The next morning, he called me into a sync. His voice was gentle in the way people get when they're about to rationalize a bad decision. "Grant, you're good at what you do, but the company's shifting toward direct vendor integration. We're looking at automation solutions that handle most of the QC workflow, so your role might pivot." "Pivot to what?" He hesitated. A manager who hesitates is never hesitating for good reasons. "We're exploring that." Translation: they hadn't thought that far. I nodded once. "Understood." If he wanted to believe my work didn't matter, I wasn't going to convince him otherwise. I've never begged a man to see what's in front of him. For the next 2 weeks, I did exactly what I was asked. On paper. I attended stand-ups, answered questions, provided status updates. But the quiet, invisible layer of work I usually handled, the early warning sweeps, the weekend log reviews, the vendor pricing drift checks, I stopped doing them. Not out of spite, out of clarity. When someone tells you your work is meaningless, you let them experience a world where you don't do it. The first week was quiet. Nothing broke. Nothing flared. Lewis strutted around like he'd caught a vision no one else could see. The second week brought a few unexpected variances in procurement billing. Finance pinged Lewis. He forwarded the message to me with a single line. "Can you clarify what this is?" I replied. "These variances are what I used to catch in the reconciliation model, the one I built last year." He didn't answer. By the third week, the snowball had rolled far enough down the hill that it didn't need me anymore. Vendor integration started failing in predictable patterns. Predictable to me, anyway. The invoice timing drifted. Matching errors doubled, then tripled. The predictive cost curve, which had been flat for 6 months, began to angle upward. Not dramatically, just enough for a trained eye to notice. And then one Thursday morning, the board requested a review of operational inefficiencies. They wanted a root cause analysis for the unusual spike in vendor-related expenses. Lewis panicked, not because he understood the numbers, but because he understood the timing. At 6:14 p.m., long after he usually left, he showed up at my desk and leaned on the partition like a man trying to look casual while smelling smoke. "Grant, do you have a minute?" I closed my laptop. "Sure," he lowered his voice. "Tomorrow's board session. Are there any surprises I should be aware of?" There it was, the first crack. I don't think you'll be surprised, I said. You've been pretty clear about how non-critical my work is. He winced. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes. The kind someone makes when they realize they might have insulted a man who remembers details. Look, he began. I didn't mean... But the alarm had already started ringing, and we both heard it. That was the night I realized something important. Lewis wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing narrative. And tomorrow, the narrative would no longer be his. The morning of the board session started with an email, not a conversation. Subject line: Ops Variance Deck Final for Board. From Lewis to CFO, Strategy, Finance, CC. Me. He rarely CC'd me on anything that mattered. Seeing my name in that line felt less like respect and more like insurance. I opened the deck. Slide 3 was my cost curve. Slide 4 was my anomaly timeline. Slide 5 was the vendor variance breakdown I'd built 6 months ago when we onboarded the new platform. My name wasn't on any of it. The notes section had one line in Lewis's voice. Short-term integration turbulence. Stabilizing with automation. No mention of missing controls. No mention of the early warning models. No mention of the fact that turbulence was just a polite word for we turned off the brakes. I walked to his office with my laptop open, knocked once, and stepped in. He was straightening his tie in the reflection of his dark monitor, practicing his serious face. Got your deck, I said. Good, he replied. You're on top of the details. I knew I could count on you. That line landed worse than the non-critical speech. You didn't write any of this, I said evenly. These charts are my models. He waved a hand like that was a minor footnote. Grant, we're one team. The board doesn't care who built the graphs. They care about the story. Then the story should be accurate. He dropped into his chair and folded his hands. Is something wrong with the numbers? No, I said. The numbers are right. The explanation under them is not. His jaw tightened. We're not pointing fingers in front of the board. We talk about market volatility, vendor transitions, macro environment. We don't say we shut off a control function and hoped automation would magically replace it. He actually flinched at the word magically, which told me he knew exactly what he'd done. This is about optics, he said. And for me, I answered, it's about the truth. My models show avoidable drift. I'm not going to contradict that in the room or in the notes. He leaned back, the smile gone. No one asked you to be in the room? There it was. They wanted my work, not my presence. He must have read something in my face, because his tone softened, doing that fake friendly thing managers do when they're worried you might actually have leverage. Look, Grant, we're all under pressure. If this goes poorly, restructuring hits everyone harder, including you. Help me land this cleanly. We keep the temperature down, and then I can protect your role when cuts roll through. Protect my non-critical role, I corrected. He exhaled sharply. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I know exactly what you meant, I said, and I also know this. I won't attach my name, quietly or otherwise, to a narrative that pretends this spike was an act of God. For a second, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the hum of the vent. Fine, he said eventually. I'll adjust the language. Just send me whatever technical notes you think are absolutely necessary so the CFO can answer questions if they dig. That was the first small win. Not big enough to celebrate, just enough to feel the balance shift a millimeter. Back at my desk, I opened a new document and wrote what finance people like. Clean, factual, sober. 3 sections. Timeline of control changes. Dates when anomaly sweeps were scaled back, weekend checks removed, and manual interventions were discouraged for efficiency. Impact assessment. Concrete dollar impact of matches that would have been flagged and corrected under the previous process. Forward projection. What the next 2 quarters would look like if nothing changed. No blame, no names, just cause and effect. Then I did one extra thing Lewis hadn't asked for. I sent the memo directly to the CFO with Finance and Lewis on copy. Attaching technical context behind the vendor variance curve, I wrote. These are the underlying process changes that correlate with the recent spike. Happy to walk through details if helpful. It was the corporate version of sliding receipts across the table. Calm, documented, time stamped. 10 minutes later, HR pinged me. Got a minute to talk? They always have a minute after you do something that might matter. I walked into Claire's glass-walled office. She gestured to a chair and gave me the empathetic head tilt. I heard there was some tension with Lewis this morning, she began. He looped me in just to make sure we're all aligned before the board session. Tension, I repeated. Is that what he called it? She folded her hands on the desk. Look, no one's questioning your diligence. Everyone knows you're smart and detailed. But we're heading into a sensitive meeting. The ask is that we present a united front. No surprises. I'm not planning any surprises, I said. I sent the CFO a factual memo. That's it. She nodded slowly. Lewis felt it might undercut his message. That's a messaging problem, not a data problem. Her lips pressed together. For a moment, she dropped the HR tone and spoke like a normal person. Off the record, if the board thinks ops doesn't know what it's doing, they don't just look at Lewis. They look at the whole structure. Roles like yours are easier to cut than titles like his. So the suggestion is, let the narrative be fuzzy so my job might be safer. It's not that simple, she said. It's exactly that simple, I replied. She sighed. Just be careful in how you frame things if they pull you in. Stick to process, not blame. And remember, sometimes surviving the quarter is more important than winning the argument. I left without promising her anything. I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to live with myself. Around noon, the CFO replied to my email. Thank you, Grant. This is helpful. Stay near your desk during the board session. We may need you on standby for questions. No emojis, no small talk, just that. Lewis forwarded the same email to me 30 seconds later, as if I hadn't been on the original thread. See, this is good, he wrote. We're all on the same team. He swung by my desk an hour before the meeting, jittery in a way he tried to disguise with jokes. You won't speak unless you're asked to, he said. If they do pull you in, just stick to the explanation we agreed on. Transitional volatility, learning curve, vendor complexity. I'll stick to the facts, I cut in, as they are. He held my gaze a second too long. Don't tank the room because you're annoyed at me. I actually laughed once, short. I was annoyed when you called my job non-critical, I said. Today I'm just doing it. He didn't have a script for that response. He opened his mouth, closed it, and walked away. At 2:00, the board filed into the big conference room at the end of the hall. You could feel it from the cubicles, the hush, the lowered voices, the way even the loud talkers quieted down like the walls had ears. I watched Lewis through the glass as he clicked through the first few slides. Body language big, hands moving, chin up. He looked like a man narrating a storm he thought he could charm his way through. Then 3 slides later, I saw it. Shoulders tightening, chin dipping, glance sideways to the CFO. He'd hit the curve. The 5.3 line glowed on the screen in a perfectly neutral font, rising at an angle that said more than any paragraph could. Several board members leaned forward. One of them pointed at the graph and asked something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the CFO turn her head, scanning the paperwork in front of her, then look up and ask a question of her own. Her eyes moved from the slide to Lewis, then down the hall toward the glass, toward me. My phone buzzed. From CFO, bring your laptop, boardroom, now. I stood up, straightened my shirt, and walked down that hallway. They'd spent 3 weeks calling my role non-critical. Now they wanted my voice in the most expensive room in the building, and that was where the real part began. The boardroom was colder than the rest of the floor, intentionally so, a quiet trick that keeps people alert, uncomfortable, unable to settle. Lewis stood near the screen with his hands clasped behind him, a stance he'd practiced, but the rhythm was off now. His heel bounced once, stopped, then bounced again. The CFO watched me walk in, and the chair of the board nodded toward the empty seat beside her. "Mr. Hale," she said, "we'd like to understand the mechanics behind this curve." Lewis tried to speak first. "I can walk through that." "We asked him," the CFO cut in, calm but surgical. That was the first time I saw Lewis shrink by an inch. I sat down, opened my laptop without theatrics, and pulled up the models, all time-stamped, version-controlled, nothing improvisational. The board liked order. I gave them order. The curve reflects the cumulative impact of deactivating anomaly sweeps, I began. These sweeps flagged vendor inconsistencies before they reached billing. The drift started the week they were scaled back. I clicked to a comparative chart. Dates, variances, actions, consequences. No one breathed loudly. One of the board members, a former auditor with a reputation for smelling lies through drywall, leaned forward. "These sweeps, why were they deactivated?" A silence formed, heavy and immediate. The kind that doesn't grow. It drops, like something cold hitting tile. Lewis cleared his throat. "It was part of the automation shift." "We expected," the auditor repeated. "Based on what assessment?" Lewis blinked. "Benchmarks from other companies." "Which companies?" the chair asked. He hesitated. Bad answer. Worse timing. "There wasn't a list," he finally said. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just kept scrolling through the logs, letting the dates speak. One board member pointed at the header of a column. "Why was this process handled manually before?" I answered that one. "Because the variance detection logic isn't clean enough to automate without human review. The vendor feeds are inconsistent across cycles. Automation works only when inputs are standardized. These aren't." She nodded slowly. "And who communicated that limitation?" "I did," I said. "Last quarter." Lewis inhaled sharply. "We discussed mitigation strategies." "Which failed," the CFO said, tapping her pen once. "We have a 5.3 upward deviation to explain." Another board member, a quiet man with glasses and an expression like he'd seen too many budgets die slow deaths, folded his hands. "Lewis, why wasn't this escalated earlier? The curve didn't spike overnight." Lewis's voice thinned. "It wasn't clear at the time." "It was clear," I said. Not loud, not emotional, just factual. All heads turned toward me. The early warning models predicted drift. The logs show repeated mismatches between vendor submissions and our internal timelines. The only thing that changed was the decision to stop reviewing those mismatches. The auditor rested her chin on her hand. Who made that decision? The question hung there. A noose, simple and elegant. Lewis stared at the table. "I approve the workflow adjustment," he said, barely audible. The CFO scribbled something. The chair exhaled through her nose. "Thank you," she said to Lewis. "Not a kind thank you. A procedural one. The kind you give someone whose role in the conversation is over." Then she turned to me. "Grant, if we restored anomaly sweeps today, how long to stabilize the curve?" I thought for a moment. 2 billing cycles, maybe 1 if we clean the backlog immediately." "And can you lead that effort?" "Yes," I said. Someone else, strategy, chimed in. "What support would you need?" "A small cross-functional group. 2 analysts from finance. 1 from vendor ops. Authority to reinstate control rules without waiting for approval chains." The chair nodded. "Done." Lewis's head jerked up. "Hold on," he said, voice cracking. "We can't reorganize functions in a meeting. This needs a process." "This is the process," the auditor said. Lewis's face drained. I watched the moment something broke behind his eyes. It wasn't humility. It was fear. The meeting wrapped with formalities, action items, timelines. When I stood to leave, the CFO stopped me at the door. "Walk with me." In the hallway, she didn't soften her tone. She wasn't there to comfort. She was there to verify. Did you withhold any information intentionally? No, I said. I documented what I saw. I stopped doing work I'd been told was non-critical. That decision, she said, saved your credibility today. We reached her office. She stepped inside but held the door. You understand, she added. This is not over. There will be personnel consequences. I understand. She studied me. I want you to send me your full year-over-year variance report. Tonight. Don't sanitize anything. I won't, she nodded once. And Grant? Be ready. For what? For movement. When she closed the door, I stood in the hallway for several seconds, letting the swirl of adrenaline settle. Something had shifted, not just the structure, me. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. I returned to my desk. Lewis's office door was shut. Hard shut. Blinds closed. Silence inside. Co-workers glanced toward me the way people glance at someone who just walked out of a storm without a drop on them. At 5:07 p.m., Lewis emerged. He walked straight toward my desk, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. We need to talk, he said. No, I replied. You need to listen. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked around, realizing that half the floor was watching. Not here, he muttered. Then schedule a meeting, I said, through Outlook. His eyebrows shot up. He wasn't used to being denied immediate access to someone lower on the org chart, but today that hierarchy wasn't real. He walked away. I started writing the year-over-year report. Every line precise, every number sourced, no emotion hidden inside the spreadsheets. Halfway through, I stopped typing. For months, I'd been shrinking myself to fit the tone of a man who couldn't read his own charts. For months, I'd let him define the value of work he didn't understand. Not anymore. At 7:22 p.m., I submitted the report to the CFO. At 7:23 p.m., she replied, Received. Effective tomorrow, you're leading ops variance review until further notice. No exclamation mark, no praise. Just the clean authority of someone who makes decisions that stick. I shut my laptop. Something inside me settled. Not triumph, not revenge, certainty. This wasn't about Lewis anymore. This was about finally stepping into a version of myself I'd been avoiding. And the next day, the fallout began. The next morning, the floor felt different, quieter. Not calm, suppressed, like the air before a storm finally breaks. People weren't making eye contact. HR walked by twice in 20 minutes, clipboards against their chests, deliberate footsteps. Finance hovered near the conference rooms like they were waiting for aftershocks. I opened my laptop at 8:01 a.m. At 8:03 a.m., I received the calendar invite. Ops Variance Task Group, daily stand-up required. Grant Hale, lead. CFO, Finance X2, Vendor Ops X1. Lewis wasn't on the invite. That was the first public signal. At 8:10 a.m., Lewis came in late. Not his usual, fashionably authoritative. Late. Actual late. Shirt wrinkled, no tie, eyes red-rimmed from a night staring at the ceiling or at a document he hoped would save him. He walked straight to my desk, ignoring everyone else. Grant, we need to get ahead of the story. I need your help framing yesterday's session. I closed my laptop gently. Lewis, yesterday wasn't a story. It was an audit. His nostrils flared. I get that you're upset. I'm not upset. I'm responsible now. Big difference. He leaned in, lowering his voice, but not his desperation. You blindsided me in that room. No, I said. You walked into that room with a blindfold on. I just didn't pretend it wasn't there. He straightened, smoothing his hair back, trying to reclaim composure. Failing. Look, he said. I know things got tense, but if you and I present a united explanation... We're not presenting anything together, I said calmly. You're not on the variance task group. He blinked, stunned. Slowly he looked down at his watch, as though expecting it to explain something reality wouldn't. Then he whispered, This isn't how the company works. Companies work the way the people in power decide, I replied. And yesterday, the power shifted. Before he could answer, the CFO appeared at the edge of our aisle, not walking toward us, standing, watching. "Grant," she said, "we're starting." Lewis turned, hopeful. She didn't even look at him, only at me. The floor went dead silent as I walked toward the glass conference room. The door closed behind me, locking Lewis out with a simple click that carried more weight than any raised voice could. Inside, the CFO handed me the seat at the head of the table. Not symbolic, instructional. "Walk us through your stabilization plan," she said. I projected my screen and spoke in a tone I hadn't used in years. Firm, measured, unafraid of being right. "We're restoring anomaly sweeps immediately. Full coverage, no exceptions." Finance nodded. "We'll need weekend logs reinstated," I continued. "Rotational schedule. Real oversight." Vendor ops added, "We can align with that." CFO scribbled notes. Then a question from the auditor who'd joined via video. "Grant, would the variance curve have been flat if your previous process had remained intact?" "Yes." A beat. "And the decision to deactivate that process, did you recommend it?" "No." "And did you warn of consequences?" "Yes, in writing, multiple times." The CFO didn't look up. "Attach those messages to the package." The meeting ended with a directive. Grant leads. Everyone answers his questions immediately. Full cooperation. When I stepped out, Lewis was standing by the wall, arms crossed, face drawn tight. "Well?" he asked. "They want a clean recovery," I said, "and a permanent fix, which I'll implement," he said quickly. "You're not part of the implementation." His jaw clenched. "Who said that?" "The CFO," his voice cracked. "Grant, this could cost me my job. It's costing the company $5 million. They care about that more." For a moment, his face softened, not with humility, but fear. Genuine human fear. The kind a man feels when the ground he built his confidence on suddenly gives way. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I'm not doing anything to you," I replied. "I'm doing my job, the one you dismissed." Something in him buckled. He walked away without another word. By lunchtime, the whispers had matured into full sentences. "Did you hear?" Board tore him apart. They pulled his permissions. "He's not leading ops anymore." "Who is?" "That guy, Grant." I didn't revel in it. I didn't even smile. I've never believed in gloating, only balance. At 2:14 p.m., HR sent out another invitation. "Lewis, HR, CFO, performance review." Discussion. I wasn't copied. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. At 3:02 p.m., Lewis came out of that meeting pale, lips pressed into a line so thin it barely existed. He walked to his office, closed the door gently, not slamming it like usual. 5 minutes later, his access badge deactivated on the first try. He jerked the handle again. Nothing. I watched him lift the badge to his face as if the plastic itself owed him an explanation. Security arrived a minute later. Not dramatic, not loud, just protocol. They escorted him to the elevator. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He walked between them like a man who finally understood what had been obvious to everyone else. No one clapped. No one whispered. Everyone just watched. A strange calm settled over the floor after they left. People worked. Phones rang. Keys clacked. It was the sound of a room returning to equilibrium. The CFO stopped by my desk in the late afternoon. "His badge is deactivated," she said, "effective immediately." I nodded. She studied me. "Do you want to know who recommended that outcome?" "I don't need to know." "It wasn't me," she said. "It was the board, directly." I let that settle. Not as satisfaction, as clarity. "He'll blame me," I said. "He can blame whoever he wants," she replied. "But he authored the process failures. You documented them. That's what saved you." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Grant, your work is critical. Don't lose sight of that again." When she walked away, I looked at the empty office Lewis used to occupy. The blinds were open now, the desk bare, the chair pushed in neatly by security. For the first time since this began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not vindication, relief, not because he was gone, but because the story had finally landed where it belonged. At 5:30 p.m., my phone buzzed, an email from HR. Grant, we need to schedule a compensation adjustment conversation. Tomorrow morning? I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, long and slow. This wasn't revenge, and it wasn't chaos anymore. It was the moment everything stopped spinning and started aligning, and tomorrow the final piece would fall into place. HR scheduled the meeting for 9 a.m. the next morning. Not a video call, an in-person meeting in the CFO wing. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to walk into that room already centered. The building was quiet at 8:45, the kind of quiet where you can hear someone 3 desks away stirring their coffee. Claire from HR greeted me first. Morning, Grant. Thanks for coming in. She wasn't using her scripted tone today. She spoke like a colleague, not a handler. That was new. The CFO entered a minute later, carrying a thin folder. Let's get started, she said, taking the seat directly across from me. There was no preamble. Grant, the board reviewed your memo and your performance history. They asked for my recommendation. She slid the folder toward me, but didn't open it. My recommendation was simple. Keep him, promote him, and pay him like the value he delivers. That sentence landed slowly, not with shock, more like something heavy clicking into its proper place. Claire opened the folder. Effective Monday, she said, your title changes to Senior Systems Risk Lead. You'll have cross-functional authority over vendor compliance, variance controls, and integration QA. You'll report directly to the CFO. Compensation has been adjusted accordingly. She pushed a page toward me. The number on it was higher than I expected. Not life-changing, not lottery money, but real recognition. Corporate acknowledgement carved in dollars instead of words. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding, but they weren't done. The CFO leaned back. We also want to talk about structure. You've been operating without proper support. You need a team. A team? Yes, 3 analysts to start. You choose them, and we'll review headcount again in Q3. It wasn't just validation, it was agency. You've been carrying a critical function alone, she continued. Frankly, for too long. Lewis didn't just mishandle process, he misrepresented risk. The board won't tolerate that. Claire added softly, we know the last few weeks were intense, but the way you handled it, methodical, factual, no theatrics, that mattered. I nodded, not out of politeness, but because agreeing felt natural. For the first time in a long time, the world around me reflected what I knew quietly about myself. The CFO closed the folder. There's one more thing. We'd like you to present quarterly variance status directly to the board going forward. No intermediaries. A slow, steady pulse thumped behind my ribs. I'm prepared to, I said. Good, she answered, because they trust you now. She stood, offering her hand. This wasn't favoritism, she said as we shook. This was competence being given the room it deserves. When I left the office, the hallway lights looked brighter, not because they were shining differently, but because I was walking differently. Back on the floor, people watched me openly this time, not curious, not cautious, aware. One of the finance analysts stopped by my desk. Heard the news, she said. We're glad you're leading. Seriously. Vendor Ops nodded from his seat. We needed someone who actually reads logs. It wasn't applause. It wasn't celebration. It was respect. Quiet, earned, grounded. At noon, as I was outlining the new workflow, my inbox pinged with a name I didn't expect to see. Lewis. Subject line. Regarding recent events, I opened it. Short email. Measured. Almost careful. Grant, I know things escalated quickly. I didn't intend for decisions to fall the way they did. If you ever feel comfortable discussing what happened, I'd like to understand your perspective. Regardless, I hope things move forward well for you. I read it twice. not because it moved me, because it confirmed what the numbers had already proven. People only respect processes they can no longer ignore. I closed the email without replying. Some conversations aren't owed, not out of hostility, out of clarity. The next few days settled into a new rhythm. Meetings where people actually listened, questions that had weight, decisions that stuck, work that didn't disappear into someone else's credit. I spent the week rebuilding systems, reinstating guardrails, designing logic that couldn't be casually dismantled by someone chasing a promotion. By Friday, the curve had begun to flatten. It would take time to reverse entirely, but the trend line was bending back toward sanity. Late that afternoon, the CFO stopped by my desk again. "How's the noise level?" she asked. "Manageable," I said. "We'll stabilize by next cycle." She nodded and looked through the glass toward Lewis's old office, now empty, equipment boxed, nameplate removed. "This company needed a recalibration," she said quietly. "Sometimes that starts in uncomfortable ways." "Sometimes," I replied. She glanced at me. "You're settling into the role well." "I'm not doing anything extraordinary," I said. "Just the work." "That," she said, "is exactly what makes it extraordinary." When she left, I leaned back in my chair and let the silence of the nearly empty floor settle around me. No tension, no second-guessing, no scrambling to justify invisible labor. Just work, clear, sharp, visible. At 6:12 p.m., I shut off my monitor, gathered my things, and walked toward the elevator. Halfway there, I paused, looked back at the floor, the glass walls, the empty office across from mine. It didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like something else, mine. When I stepped outside, the evening air felt clean, crisp, the kind of air that makes your lungs feel new. People think satisfaction is loud, triumphant, fireworks and applause. It isn't. It's quiet. It's the absence of tension. It's walking to your car knowing you didn't compromise yourself, not once, not at any step. It's hearing a man call your role non-critical, and proving, calmly, methodically, that the truth doesn't bend for titles. On Monday, I would start building my team, fixing the system, strengthening the foundation, doing the work no one saw until the world forced them to. But tonight, I drove home with the windows down and one simple thought anchoring me. Sometimes justice isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just a man quietly stepping into the role everyone else overlooked and fitting it exactly the way the work always deserved. The story didn't end with revenge. It ended with something better. Ownership.